Welcome to the very first episode of the Pumped on Property show. Now, my name's Ben Everingham and I'm your host, and in every episode of this podcast, I'm going to be talking about crazy things that I've learned from buying a bunch of properties myself over the last 10 years and achieving financial freedom by age 30, as well as interviewing some of the coolest people from all different walks of life around Australia and talking about their personal property investment journey. I'm also going to be having a couple of regulars on the podcast, including my brother Simon, my best mate and business partner Ads, as well as my sister Crystal. Now, the 3 or 4 of us are going to be talking about all sorts of crazy things that we're coming across as we buy property for ourselves and help our clients buy over $100 million worth of property each year. In today's very first episode, I want to talk about the 7 reasons why investing in property is an amazing thing. And the way I wanted to kick that off is the way I want to kick everything off with this podcast, and that's having a little bit of fun. Now, property investing to me is fun. I know it's not everybody else's passion out there, but for me, it has been the funnest thing that I've got my head around over the last 10 years, and it has completely changed my life, my family's life. You know, it's been ridiculously stressful. I've had people burn down my granny flat. I've had flooding issues. I've had renovation and maintenance issues. I've had to sack a bunch of property managers. I've worked with 7 or 8 different mortgage brokers and solicitors over the years. But the greatest thing about property is the fact that, you know, you can still have a smile on your face after all of those types of things. And as long as you look at it as a lifelong learning journey where it's never going to be perfect because you're dealing with so many different moving parts and people, then it can literally be one of the funnest things. And you know, the other things that I love about property personally isn't just the fact that it's enabled me to become financially free or the cash flow and the capital gains that you get, but it's the touchy-feely stuff. I love renovating properties as much as it causes my wife and I to have temporary breakdowns in our communication and go nuts at each other. I love taking something that looks really ugly that the marketplace doesn't value and cleaning it up and turning it into something better. I love nothing more than finding a blank piece of land in a great estate or a great infill site and building something from nothing and watching it come out of the ground. I'm actually doing something like that down there in North Brisbane at the moment. It's just one of those things that you can walk through the product after you've created it and see the marketplace value it for a premium, see renters pay a premium for the property, and you know, just really have that experience of, you know, it's tangible, I can feel it, I can touch it, you know, I can breathe it, and it's a big part of my world. And you know, the stories that we've had personally, my wife and I, as we've gone through this journey of buying 11 properties together over the last the last 8 years, have just been absolutely insane. And then on top of that, we've helped buy over $300 million worth of property for other people around us. Now let's talk about how property can change your world, because that is the most important thing. Now, whether we like it or not, or you love it or not like I do, property is really just a means to an end. And for all of us in life, the end point should be a position where we can live our life with as many choices as possible without worrying about money, without stressing about fear, where we can spend time with the people that we care about, doing the things that we enjoy, like starting businesses or like changing careers and doing something that we would enjoy spending our time doing, like volunteering, like traveling more, like training more, like finding out what our values truly are and living those values day to day. For me, there's really just 2 key values that I have in my life. Now, the first one is my family, which is so important to me. I work with my mum, my sister, my brother, and also spending time with my wife and my 3 children, Summer, Harper and Cove. So it's really about living those values on a daily basis. And I wouldn't be happy if I just worked 10 hours plus a day, which I did for such a long period of time. You know, for me to have a meaningful day, I've really got to be spending time with them. For me, my values are super simple. There's really just 2 things that I value above everything in life. Now, the first one is spending quality time with my amazing family. Now, my mum, my brother and my sister work for me and we're all so tight, but I also love absolutely love nothing more than spending time with my wife and my children, Summer, Harper and Cove. So I've enabled myself through property to be able to just work 4 days a week in this business. And my second value outside of my family and spending time with them is work and contributing in a meaningful way. And I know there's so many people listening to this, like myself, a number of years ago, that just couldn't stand the idea of going and working in the industry or for the boss or in the job that they're doing right now that they hate, but they can't see any way out of it. So I love that about property. And the thing about property is it's not a get rich quick scheme. It takes time. And unfortunately, the reality is if you do want to replace your income, it's going to take 10, 15 years. But you know, we'll talk about that in future episodes as we go on around strategies to sort of speed that up or, you know, set up a foundation and then jump back to something else down the line in the future. It gives us the opportunity to have choices in our future where we're not dependent on money and we're not dependent on a job for our happiness or our survival anymore. And the sooner you get choices in your life, I believe, the sooner you can work towards what it is that you really want in your life and find your why, find your purpose, uncover your values. And I think the more Australians and more people around the world that get in a position where they're no longer worrying about money and they're getting to make choices based on what they want to do as opposed to things that they don't want to do, the world will become a better place. So property investing gives you choices, and that is the major reason why I love investing in it. And I'm so grateful to have found it at 24 years of age. The third thing I wanted to talk about in relation to why invest in property is really around this concept of financial freedom. Now, when I'm speaking financial freedom, what I'm really saying is, you know, regardless of where your concept is, replacing your current annual salary or your current combined annual salary is a pretty nice place to start. And if you're sitting there earning, you know, big money and that seems overwhelming right now, then you know, maybe just identifying what your base living costs are in your life and looking to replace that as soon as possible. So financial freedom is about money coming in night and day, whether you're awake or whether you're asleep, passively without you doing anything except the admin for the rest of your life. Now, property is one way to achieve financial freedom. Obviously, there's so many other ways like stocks, businesses, commodities. There's just infinite number of ways to explore how to achieve financial freedom, but for some reason property has always stuck out to me as a simple way to do it. And I think I like property because it's real, because I can touch it. I also have the passion for it, and the passion has given me the persistence during the hard times and the discipline to continually keep learning about it and to continue to keep growing. And I suppose whichever way you get to financial freedom, there's no getting rich quick way. You've really got to have a desire to keep learning and keep following through on that strategy for long enough until it actually clicks and you are financially free. So I love the fact that, you know, someone could go out and buy one property and in 20 years time have paid that property off and be getting $1,000 a week cash flow for the rest of their life. Or you could go out and buy 2 houses and build 2 granny flats on them and in 15 years time be getting, you know, $2,000 a week in rent return from those properties, or $100,000 a year. I love the fact if you're wanting to push it further, then you could go out and buy 3, 5, 10 properties and work towards owning all of them outright in your future as well. And I love the fact that people need somewhere to live, and that 30% of Australia's population is always going to be a renter because, you know, some people just are moving here for the first time, or some people are young, or some people are really old, or some people just haven't figured out how to save an actual deposit yet, which is a huge barrier to entry for a lot of people. So property enables you to achieve financial freedom with the right strategy and the right amount of time, and that is one of the major benefits of it. And the fact of the matter is, once you own a property completely outright and you have a secure tenant in place in a regular marketplace, that income continues to come in, rain, hail or shine, you know. And if you've bought a suburb with a low vacancy rate and you've bought a good area with strong underlying and future demand, then the risk is very low from that asset. There's obviously other ways that people achieve financial freedom through property. Some people like to go out there and develop. Other people like to, you know, let's say you've got $1 million worth of property. One of the things that I've spent so much time doing over the last 8 years is really understanding the data sitting behind property, and that's enabled me to begin to study my history. And for those of you who are as geeky as I am and that love that history stuff, what I'm really talking about is amazing books like Fred Harrison's book, The Power in the Land. Now, in the 80s, Fred Harrison predicted the 1990s recession. I think he called it 7 years before it happened to the year in that book. Now, Fred Harrison also went and wrote another book called Boom and Bust, which in 2005 was published and predicted the 2007 financial crisis. For those of you interested in what he's thinking about for the future, he's talking about the next major financial crisis coming globally, which affects property prices all over the world in a big way in about 2026. Let's see what happens in 8 years time from today. But Fred Harrison has written some incredible books, and he's got some incredible videos online if you're interested in that history. He inspired another guy called Phil Anderson, who went and wrote a book called The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, where you can understand the history of 250 years of booms and busts in American property prices. So they're two fantastic sources to start. And then you can start looking at it from an Australian perspective, where John Lindemann wrote a book called Mastering the Australian Housing Market that looked at 100 years of Australian history. And you can look into the core logic in Australian Bureau of Statistics data. But what I love that over 200 years of property price history in Australia, the average annual rate of return from Australian property has been just above 10% per annum. Now, I don't believe that that's going to continue to happen in the future, because times have changed, wages are a little bit lower, and property prices are a little bit higher right now at this stage in the cycle, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne. But it does give me confidence that even if I get half of that, 5% per year on my assets over time, it means every 15 years, effectively my property is doubling in value. And I'm more than happy with that as a long-term outcome for myself, which means over 45 years, things are looking very, very good. And there's just no way of saving that sort of money over time that you can make on property. So if you understand your history, you understand that we go through global cycles, we understand that we go through national, state, and local market, even local suburb cycles as well. So it's important to learn your history and understand your history. And what I've learned from researching history is there's some rules which we'll talk about in future episodes, like timing, like capital growth, like cash flow, like manufacturing growth. And all of these things can be used as tools as an investor that, when you overlay timing, you can really take advantage of market conditions and significantly outperform market averages, which, isn't what it's about for everybody, but it is what it's about for some of us who want to do better and want to know more so that we can do better. What I love from looking at the last 46 years of history in Australia is that property prices in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane have all gone up by an average of 9.5% per annum, with surprisingly Brisbane doing the best over that period of time at 9.7% per annum. So when you understand your history, you can start peeling back the hype, the media, the sentiment, and you can really start looking for opportunities based on what markets have done in the past and what potential they've got to do well in the future. Another thing that I love about property is the fact that you can use leverage, and that leverage turns into compound growth over time. Now, I'm an examples and a data guy, so let me give you an example of this in practice. Let's say that you used a 10% deposit today to go out and buy a $500,000 property. That means you've put down $50,000 out of your own cash for the deposit. Obviously there's closing costs on top of that. Now, if you were to hold that $500,000 property for the next 20 years and that property was to grow in value by just 5% per annum, we're talking about a property that's now worth $1.3 million. So your $500,000 over 20 years has turned into $1.3 million. Now, that's a gain on the property's value of over $800,000, but even more than that, you've basically created $800,000 worth of value or equity from putting down $50,000 out of your own pocket. And that is one of the most powerful things about property investing, and one of the most significant things that people aren't in the property market that they don't understand and that they lack and that they miss. Now, let's say another example, you're getting all crazy and you wanted to get out there and buy $1 million property with a 10% deposit right now, or a couple of properties worth $1 million. So with the 10% deposit on $1 million, you're now talking about a $100,000 deposit. And same rule as before, we hold those 2 properties or 1 property worth a total of $1 million for the next 20 years, and they grow by just 5% per annum. That $1 million is now turned into $2.6 million worth of value, or a $1.6 million increase in your net wealth position over a 20-year period of time. Now, regardless of if you're earning $50,000 right now, or $300,000 right now, or $1 million right now, it is going to be really, really, really difficult to say $1.6 million after tax in cash over the next 20 years. And that's the power of property. So for a $100,000 deposit on your $1 million property, you've made $1.6 million. So property is a slow burn. It takes time. You know, some years in property are going to be flat. The market's going to do nothing. In fact, there's been periods in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne where property prices have sat flat between 5 and 11 years straight. Flat to me is a year without double-digit price growth. There's other periods where property prices explode and they boom, like we saw in Sydney and Melbourne between 2013 and 2017. And there's times when they go down, like they are in Sydney right now, for example, where they might go down between 5, 10, 15 or 20%. But that is all part of the cycle, and what matters as a long-term investor is that longer-term approach to investing in property, and not getting caught up as to whether the property booms this year or busts next year, but what the average return over time is, and beating the average market returns over that time. Another thing I absolutely love about property is the options that it gives you. So let's talk capital growth as one strategy, let's talk cash flow as another strategy, and let's talk manufactured growth as a third strategy. One of the most amazing things about property investing is that you can choose your own adventure. You don't have to listen to me, you don't have to listen to anybody else in the marketplace, or you can listen to all of us and pick and choose the best bits that make the most sense to you personally as an investor. Now, your job as an investor, or my job as an investor, is to understand my personal risk profile, understand the things that are holding me back, to understand what I want in the future and what I want for my family and what my line in the sand point is, and then to build a strategy around that that makes sense for me personally. So for Ben Everingham today, I would like to have, you know, a couple of $100,000 worth of passive income coming in through my property investments in the future. That's what I'm personally working towards now. In the future, that might be less or more, but that's what I'm working towards now. Like when I was 24 years of age, I was working towards $100,000 a year of passive income. And, you know, that is a nice line in the sand point to just sort of draw what it is that you want from property. But you know, the cool thing about property is you can choose to go for that using capital growth. So an example could be to buy a couple of really high quality properties and then sell a couple of those properties in the future and live off the cash flow that way. Or you could go for a different strategy where you buy some really, really high quality cash flow properties and then work hard to pay off that debt over time and live off the cash flow. Alternatively, you could just find one little project every couple of years that, you know, makes you around about $100,000 per year from buying and selling it. And, you know, you could do that with your family, and that could be the way that you replace your income through property. Now, that third option's a lot more active as a strategy, but what I'm trying to get to here is there's so many different ways to pick your own adventure with property. Now, because I'm a bit of a kid in the candy store and property is the biggest candy store of all to me, I like to come at property from a timing perspective. Now, the reason I like timing more than any of those other three things I mentioned a moment ago is because with timing, you can really do things that you could never do if you didn't understand it. And what I mean by timing is, imagine you had have jumped into the property market in Sydney in 2013 and bought something for $600,000. That property is most probably worth $1 million to $1.2 million at least right now as of 2018. So timing is a very, very powerful thing. And for those of you who understand the long-term global cycles as well as the national cycles, it isn't that difficult to actually time markets. And for those of you that listened to my videos 2 or 3 years ago, you'll hear me calling what's happening now from a timing perspective in Sydney and Melbourne with the prices going down a little bit. You'll also hear my thoughts about the future, and I'm not saying that I can accurately forecast the future. I'm just saying there's patterns with property, and once you start to understand those patterns, you can use those patterns to your advantage, especially if you've read the Fred Harrison stuff, the Phil Anderson stuff, and the Core Logic stuff properly. So I love property. I love that it gives you options. I love how much fun it is. I love how it gives you choices, which is the most important thing to have in your life as soon as possible and as young as possible. I love that it can help you achieve financial freedom, and it is a strategy that 70% of the world's wealthiest people have either used to become that wealthy or move their money into once they become that wealthy. I love that you can learn about the history, and there's amazing publications out there to understand it, and books and podcasts and videos on this stuff. I love that you can use leverage and the power of compound growth to achieve what it is that you want to do. And I love that there's options and there's not one clear way. Now, in future episodes, I'm going to talk about my personal philosophy and my personal strategy towards property, but always take that with a grain of salt and make sure you find something that works for you based on where you're at and where you'd like to be in the future. So thank you so much for your time and attention today. I'm really excited about this podcast and what it's going to become, and the guests that we're going to have in here in the future sharing their stories and insights as well. And yeah, welcome to the show. Thank you.